The waitress fed the unaware he's a billionaire in disguise. What if kindness were the only currency that truly mattered? Imagine opening a door for a stranger and it changes your life forever. Welcome to Emotion Waves, where stories touch your soul. On a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago, 34-year-old Grace wiped down the worn Formica counter of Mel's Diner for what felt like the 100th time that day. Her feet ached, her uniform smelled of coffee and bacon grease, and her tips barely covered her grandmother's medication this week. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows as a figure shuffled past. A man in tattered clothes, shoulders hunched against the storm. Grace watched him pause under the streetlight, studying the warm glow spilling from the diner's windows. His weathered face pressed briefly against the glass, and for just a moment their eyes met. She saw something there. Not just hunger, but a deep, quiet loneliness that reminded her of her grandfather's eyes in his final days. Without thinking twice, Grace unlocked the door. Little did she know, this simple act of compassion would change everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments on Emotion Waves and let's connect. Grace had been working at Mel's Diner for 3 years, ever since her grandmother Helen had been diagnosed with diabetes. The insurance barely covered the basics, and someone had to keep the bills paid. Her parents had passed in a car accident when she was 22, leaving her to care for the woman who'd raised her through childhood summers and scraped-knee afternoons. "Come in out of that cold," Grace called to the stranger, holding the door wide despite knowing her manager would disapprove. The man hesitated, water dripping from his gray beard onto the sidewalk. His clothes, once perhaps a decent coat and slacks, hung loosely on his thin frame. "I don't have money for food," he said quietly, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone who'd once known better days. "Didn't ask if you did?" Grace replied with a gentle smile. "Coffee is always brewing, and I've got some soup that needs eating before it goes bad." The man stepped inside, and Grace noticed his careful mannerisms, the way he wiped his feet thoroughly, how he nodded politely to the other late-night customers. This wasn't someone born to the streets. He introduced himself simply as David and settled into the corner booth where Grace brought him a steaming bowl of chicken soup and fresh cornbread. "This is very kind," David said, his eyes brightening as he tasted the homemade broth. "Your grandmother's recipe?" Grace paused, surprised. "How did you know about my grandmother?" "Lucky guess. This tastes like love. That's grandmother cooking." David's smile revealed teeth that, despite everything, had once known good dental care. As David ate, Grace found herself drawn into conversation. He asked thoughtful questions about her life, listened intently when she mentioned Helen's health struggles, and somehow made her feel heard in a way she hadn't experienced in months. There was wisdom in his faded blue eyes and kindness that seemed to run so deep. "You work double shifts often?" David asked, noticing her exhaustion. "Most nights. Grandmother needs her medications, and they don't come cheap, but we manage." Grace refilled his coffee cup, noting how he held it like fine china. Other customers came and went, truckers grabbing late dinners, night shift workers getting coffee before long hours. Grace served them all with her usual warmth, but found herself glancing back at David's table. He'd pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and was writing carefully with an expensive-looking pen that seemed oddly out of place. "What are you writing?" she asked during a quiet moment. "Just thoughts, reminders of good people and kindness." David closed the notebook gently. "Sometimes we forget that angels walk among us every day." As closing time approached, Grace felt reluctant to see him go. David had brought something peaceful to the diner's usual late-night chaos, a reminder that connection could happen anywhere, even between strangers. "Will you be all right out there tonight?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. David stood slowly, leaving a small folded paper on the table. "I'll be fine." "Thank you, Grace. You've given me something precious tonight." After he left, Grace unfolded the paper. Written in elegant handwriting were just 4 words: "Kindness is never forgotten." What would you do if a stranger left you a mysterious note? Stay tuned to Emotion Waves to find out what happens next. 3 days later, Grace arrived at work to find her manager, Pete, waiting with grim news. Corporate's been watching our numbers, he said, avoiding her eyes.
They're cutting staff. I'm sorry, Grace, but I have to let you go.
The words hit like a physical blow. But Pete, I've never missed a shift, never caused problems. It's not about that. It's about money and we're not making enough. Pete genuinely looked pained. Last hired, first fired. That's how it works. Grace's mind raced to her grandmother's medical bills. The rent due next week. The empty refrigerator at home, when? End of the week. I'll give you good references. Promise. That evening, Grace sat beside Helen's hospital bed, holding her grandmother's frail hand. Helen had taken a turn for the worse, and the doctors wanted to keep her for observation. The medical bills were already staggering. I lost my job today, Grandma, Grace whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Helen's eyes, still sharp despite her illness, filled with worry. Oh, sweetheart, we'll figure something out. We always do. But Grace could see the fear beneath her grandmother's brave words. They both knew the reality. Without steady income, they were facing impossible choices between medications and basic necessities. Walking home through the cold November night, Grace found herself passing Mel's diner. Through the windows, she saw the corner booth where David had sat. On impulse, she went inside, ordered coffee she couldn't afford, and sat in that same spot. You look troubled, said Janet, the night waitress. Everything okay? Grace shared her situation, and Janet listened with the compassion of someone who'd faced her own struggles. You know, there's something strange, Janet said. That homeless fellow you fed the other night? He's been back twice asking about you. David, that's him. Left this for you? Janet handed her another folded paper. This one contained an address and a simple message. If you need help, come here. A friend Grace stared at the address. It was in Lincoln Park, one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods. She almost laughed at the absurdity, a homeless man living in Lincoln Park. But desperation makes people consider impossible things. The next morning, after spending another sleepless night worrying about bills and her grandmother's care, Grace took the bus to the address. The neighborhood was everything she'd expected. Tree-lined streets, elegant brownstones, luxury cars parked along pristine sidewalks. The address led to a magnificent building with a doorman in a crisp uniform. Grace almost turned back, feeling foolish and out of place in her worn jeans and second-hand coat. Can I help you? The doorman asked politely. I'm looking for David. He gave me this address. She showed him the paper, feeling ridiculous. The doorman's expression changed completely. You must be Grace. Mr. David has been expecting you. Please come in. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up on emotion waves. As the elevator rose to the penthouse level, Grace's confusion deepened. When the doors opened, she stepped into an apartment that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Artwork that belonged in museums. Furniture that cost more than she made in a year. And there, standing by the windows in an expensive suit, was David. I don't understand, Grace whispered, staring at the man she'd fed soup to just days ago. Gone were the tattered clothes and unkempt appearance. David stood before her as someone entirely different. Polished. Confident, unmistakably wealthy. Please sit down, David said gently, gesturing to a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than her yearly rent. I know this must be confusing. Grace remained standing, her mind reeling. Who are you really? My name is David Hartwell. I'm the CEO of Hartwell Industries. He paused, letting that sink in. We manufacture medical equipment, among other things. Grace felt lightheaded. Hartwell Industries. She'd seen their trucks around the city, knew they were one of Chicago's largest companies. But you were homeless, hungry. I was testing something, David said quietly. For the past month, I've been living on the streets trying to understand what it's really like for people who have nothing. It was research for a foundation I'm starting. The words hit Grace like a slap. Research? Her voice rose with hurt and anger. I worried about you. I used my own money to feed you, and it was all just some rich man's experiment. David's face showed genuine regret. That's not what I meant to. Do you have any idea what that meal cost me? Grace's hands shook with emotion. I'm losing my job. My grandmother's in the hospital, and I gave you food I couldn't afford because I thought you needed it.
Grace,
Please. No. Tears streamed down her face. You played with my kindness like it was some game. Do you know how that feels? David stepped closer, his own eyes moist. You're right to be angry. What I did was thoughtless and cruel, even if that wasn't my intention. But Grace, your kindness that night, it wasn't part of any test for me. It became the most real thing I'd experienced in years. Pretty words don't pay my grandmother's medical bills, Grace said bitterly. You're right, and that's why I asked you here. David moved to his desk, retrieving a folder. I've been thinking about you constantly since that night. Not because of my research, but because you showed me what genuine compassion looks like. Grace wiped her tears, still wary. What do you want from me? I want to offer you a job. Director of Community Outreach for the Hartwell Foundation. We're launching a program to help families dealing with medical crises, exactly what you're going through. Grace stared at him. You're offering me charity. I'm offering you a chance to help others the way you helped me. The salary is $60,000 a year with full medical benefits that would cover your grandmother's care. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic far below. Grace's mind raced between hope and suspicion. Was this real kindness or just guilt money? I need time to think, she said finally. David nodded. Of course. But Grace, that night at the diner when you opened the door for a stranger, that wasn't research being conducted on you. That was just you being exactly who you are. And that person is remarkable. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments on Emotion Waves. Grace left without another word, her heart torn between hope and the fear of being deceived again. Grace spent 2 sleepless nights walking Chicago streets, wrestling with David's offer. Part of her wanted to reject it entirely. Pride demanded she not accept anything from someone who'd deceived her. But every time she visited her grandmother in the hospital, watching Helen try to hide her pain to avoid expensive treatments, pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. On the 3rd morning, Grace made her decision. She called the number David had given her. I'll take the job, she said simply when he answered. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to meet the families we'll be helping. I want to understand their stories personally, not just read reports. And I want to start with the people I know who are struggling. The other servers at diners, the night shift workers, the single parents working 2 jobs. Done, David said immediately. When can you start? Tomorrow. But first, I want you to come somewhere with me. That evening, Grace led David back to Mel's diner. Not as research this time, but as himself. She wanted to see if the man who'd sat in that corner booth was real or just another mask. This is David, she told Janet and Pete simply. He's helping me start a new foundation. David ordered the same chicken soup Grace had served him that first night. As he ate, Grace watched him carefully. He spoke genuinely with Pete about the challenges of running a small business, listened as Janet shared stories about her own struggles with her disabled son's care, and somehow managed to make everyone feel heard and valued. You know, Pete said as they prepared to leave, when Grace fed you that night, she used her own money for the ingredients, said she couldn't let anyone go hungry on her watch. David looked at Grace with something deeper than gratitude in his eyes. She saved me that night in ways she'll never know. Walking out together, Grace felt something shift between them. Why did you really live on the streets for a month? She asked. David was quiet for a long moment. My father built Hartwell Industries from nothing. When he died 5 years ago, he left me everything, but also a letter. He said he was disappointed that I'd never known real hardship, never understood what most people face every day. He challenged me to truly learn what it meant to have nothing. And did you learn? I learned that pride tastes bitter when you're hungry. I learned that most people walk past suffering without seeing it. And I learned that when someone like you opens a door to a stranger, it's not just about food. It's about recognizing shared humanity. Grace felt her last walls of anger crumble. So what happens now? Now we help people together. The foundation has enough funding to assist 500 families this first year with medical expenses, job training, emergency housing, whatever they need most. As they reached David's building, Grace realized something had fundamentally changed. The man standing beside her wasn't the polished CEO or the homeless stranger. He was someone in between, someone real. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to Emotion Waves for more heartwarming tales. I think, Grace said quietly, this might actually work. Months later, Grace stood in the offices of the Hartwell Foundation, looking out at Lake Michigan as spring sunshine danced across the water. The walls around her displayed photos of the families they'd helped. Janet's son getting the therapy he needed, Pete expanding his diner with a small business loan, dozens of others who'd found hope when they'd almost given up. Helen had recovered beautifully, her medications now fully covered by Grace's insurance. Her spirits lifted by seeing her granddaughter find purpose and joy in her work. She'd even started volunteering at the foundation, sharing her own wisdom with families facing medical crises. Busy morning? David asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee from Mel's diner, a tradition they'd maintained. The best kind. Grace smiled, accepting the familiar warmth. Mrs. Patterson's surgery went perfectly. The Johnson family got approved for their housing assistance, and we got 3 new volunteer applications. David settled into the chair across from her desk. Their relationship had evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than the dramatic circumstances that brought them together. He'd proven himself not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency, showing up early, staying late, remembering every family's story, treating everyone with equal dignity. "I have something for you," David said, producing a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple silver locket. When Grace opened it, she found a tiny photo of Mel's diner on one side and an engraving on the other. "Kindness is never forgotten. You kept that paper?" she said softly. "I keep everything that reminds me of the night my life really began." David's voice held the same gentle sincerity she'd first heard in that corner booth. "Grace, I've been thinking about what? About how some people spend their whole lives searching for their purpose, and how lucky we are to have found ours." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was wondering if you might want to find it together permanently." Grace felt her heart quicken as David pulled out a small velvet box. "David, I'm not asking because I'm grateful or because we work well together professionally. I'm asking because somewhere between that first bowl of soup and this morning's coffee, I fell completely in love with who you are." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Grace looked at this man who'd entered her life as a stranger needing shelter, became a friend offering opportunity, and had grown into someone she couldn't imagine living without. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace thought about her grandmother's words from years ago. "Kindness always comes back to you, sweetheart, just not always in ways you expect." Outside their window, Chicago hummed with life, thousands of people facing their own struggles, their own moments of choice between cynicism and compassion. Grace and David would spend their lives trying to make those choices a little easier, one family at a time. That evening, they had dinner at Mel's diner, sitting in the corner booth where everything began. Janet served them chicken soup with a knowing smile. And Grace realized that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the simplest acts of human kindness. If you enjoyed this story on Emotion Waves, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, hope, and the power of compassion.